Admiral Kester stood on the command deck of the Eternal Vigilance, watching the stars through the massive viewing port. The ship drifted slowly through what had once been the heart of the Zephyrian fleet. Now, twisted metal and debris floated in the void like the bones of giants. The war was over. 300 years of fighting between the Zephyrian hegemony and the Vrak collective had finally ended. Not because one side won, but because both sides had nothing left to fight with. The galaxy's two greatest powers had destroyed each other so completely that neither could continue. Kessatar's blue-scaled fingers traced the scars on his neck, reminders of boarding actions from decades past. He was old now, older than most Zephyrians ever lived. The war had aged him beyond his years. His species lived for 2 centuries on average, but Kessatar felt like he had lived 10 lifetimes. "Admiral, the casualty reports are complete," said Commander Thalak, approaching with a datapad in her claws. Her voice carried the weight of terrible news. Kessatar took the pad and read the numbers. They were worse than he had feared. Of the great Zephyrian fleet that once numbered 50,000 warships, only 43 remained operational. The hegemony's population had fallen from 12 billion to just under 2 billion survivors scattered across dozens of worlds. The Vrak collective had suffered similar losses. Their insectoid warriors, once numbering in the trillions, were now reduced to small pockets of survivors hiding in the ruins of their hive worlds. Their great breeding ships, massive vessels that could produce 1 million soldiers in a single cycle, were nothing but radioactive debris. "What about the other species?" Kessatar asked, handing the pad back to his second-in-command. "They are emerging from hiding," Thalak replied. "The Kalari Trade Federation has reopened 3 major shipping routes. The Morvac Republic is sending aid ships to refugee camps. Even the machine collective known as the Assembly has begun transmitting again." Kessatar nodded slowly. For 3 centuries, the smaller galactic powers had hidden while the 2 giants fought. They had watched entire star systems burn and said nothing. They had seen worlds turn to glass and remain silent. But they had survived, and now they were ready to rebuild. "They think the age of great wars is over," Kessatar said, more to himself than to Thalak. "Isn't it, Admiral? Both we and the Vrak exhausted everything we had. No one has the strength to fight anymore." Kessatar looked out at the debris field again. The twisted metal caught starlight and threw it back in strange patterns. Somewhere in that wreckage were ships he had served on as a young officer, vessels that had been home to thousands of his people. "Perhaps you are right," he said. "Perhaps we have finally learned that war brings only destruction." But even as he spoke the words, Kessatar felt uncertain. War had defined his people for so long that he wondered what they would become in peace. The Zephyrians had been warriors first, explorers and traders second. Their entire society was built around the military. What would happen to them now? A soft chime from the communications console interrupted his thoughts. Lieutenant Veltar, the young communications officer, looked up from his station with confusion on his reptilian features. "Admiral, I'm receiving strange energy readings from Deep Space Monitoring Station Gamma 7. "Strange how?" Kester asked, walking over to the console. "The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. They're coming from the outer rim territories beyond the galactic edge. The patterns are unusual." Thalak joined them at the console. "Could it be Vrak survivors trying to regroup?" Veltar shook his head. "No, Commander. I know Vrak energy signatures. This is something else, something we've never encountered before." Kessatar studied the readings on the screen. The energy patterns were indeed unlike anything he had seen in his long career. They were organized, clearly artificial, but they followed no known technological principles. More concerning was their location. The outer rim was supposed to be empty space, unexplored and uninhabited. "How long have these readings been detected?" he asked. "Station Gamma 7 reports they began 3 days ago. They're growing stronger. Send a message to High Command," Kessatar ordered. "Inform them of these readings and request instructions." As Veltar worked to compose the message, Kessatar felt a strange sensation in the pit of his stomach. It was the same feeling he had experienced before major battles during the war. A sense that something important was about to happen, something that would change everything. Around the galaxy, other species were beginning to hope. The Kalari merchants were planning new trade routes through systems that had been battlefields for generations. The Morvac diplomats spoke of a golden age of peace and cooperation. The machine collective was calculating the resources needed to rebuild entire civilizations. On the former Vrak worlds, survivors emerged from deep bunkers where they had hidden for decades. Their queens, the few that remained, began the slow process of rebuilding their broken hives. They too believed the fighting was over. But in the deep monitoring stations scattered along the galactic rim, sensitive instruments continued to detect the strange energy signatures. The readings were growing stronger every day, and they were moving closer to inhabited space. Kessitar spent the rest of his duty shift reviewing reports from across the galaxy. Refugee fleets were being resettled. Emergency government was being established on dozens of worlds. The great work of reconstruction was beginning. Yet he could not shake the feeling that something was watching from the darkness between stars. The war with the Vrak had lasted 3 centuries, but it had been a known enemy. Both sides understood each other's capabilities and limitations. They had fought with weapons and tactics that both civilizations recognized. These new energy readings suggested something different, something that had been waiting while the galaxy tore itself apart, something that might not follow the rules of civilized warfare. As the Eternal Vigilance continued its patrol through the debris field, Kessitar made a decision. He would not report his concerns to High Command yet. They had enough problems dealing with the aftermath of the war, but he would keep watching the deep space monitors. The galaxy believed the age of great wars was over. Kessitar hoped they were right, but his warrior's instincts told him that something new was coming from the darkness, something that might make the 300-year war between the Zephyrians and Vrak look like a minor disagreement. In the silence of space, surrounded by the wreckage of 2 great civilizations, Admiral Kessitar continued his watch. Behind him, his crew worked to maintain their aging ship. Around him, the galaxy began to dream of peace. But in the deep darkness beyond the rim, something else was stirring, something that would soon change everything the galaxy thought it knew about war, peace, and the balance of power among the stars. Captain Elena Vasquez checked the navigation display for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The UNSS Meridian was exactly where it was supposed to be, drifting at the edge of what their long-range sensors had identified as inhabited space. After 18 months of travel from Earth, they had finally reached the galaxy's outer territories. The ship was small by Earth Navy standards, only 300 meters long, and carrying a crew of 45. It was designed for exploration and first contact missions, not for combat. Though like all Earth vessels, it carried enough firepower to defend itself if necessary. "Captain, I'm detecting a vessel approaching from the inner system," reported Lieutenant Park from the sensor station. "It appears to be damaged but operational." Elena moved to look over his shoulder at the readings. The alien ship was roughly the same size as the Meridian, but its design was completely different. Where human ships were built with sharp angles and efficient lines, this vessel curved and flowed like it had been grown rather than constructed. "Are they scanning us?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Multiple sensor sweeps. They seem very interested in our ship's construction." Elena nodded. This was exactly what they had trained for during the long journey from Earth. First contact with an alien species, the moment that would determine humanity's relationship with the galaxy, beyond their solar system. "Open a communication channel on all standard frequencies," she ordered. "Let's see if we can talk to them." The response came faster than expected. The view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the alien vessel. Elena found herself looking at a tall reptilian being with blue scales and intelligent yellow eyes. The creature wore what appeared to be a military uniform, and its bearing suggested high rank. "Unknown vessel, you are in Zephyrian territorial space," the alien said. The ship's translation system worked quickly to convert the words into English. "State your identity and purpose." Elena stepped forward, activating the recording system as she did. This conversation would be transmitted back to Earth and studied for decades to come. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Nations ship Meridian, representing the United Nations of Sol. We come in peace, seeking contact with other intelligent species." The alien's expression changed slightly. Elena had studied xenobiology during her training, but reading alien emotions was still difficult. "United Nations," the creature said. "Sol? These terms are not in our databases. What species are you?" "We are human," Elena replied. "We come from the planet Earth in the Sol system. We are new to interstellar travel. The alien considered this information. I am Commander Zekhan of the Zephyrian Hegemony Patrol Vessel Swift Justice. You say you represent something called United Nations. What is this organization? Elena paused. How do you explain democracy to an alien species that might have no concept of individual rights or representative government? The United Nations is a democratic organization that represents all the nations of our homeworld, she said carefully. Our people choose their leaders through voting, and those leaders work together to make decisions for our species. The translation system seemed to struggle with the concept. Commander Zekhan's head tilted in what Elena hoped was curiosity rather than aggression. Your people choose their leaders? The Zephyrian asked. But how do you maintain order? How do you ensure loyalty to the state? We believe that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, Elena explained. Our people follow laws because they participate in making them. Zekhan was clearly having trouble understanding this concept. Among Zephyrians, military hierarchy was absolute. Orders flowed down from the top, and questioning authority was unthinkable. This is a strange philosophy, he said finally, but perhaps that explains your ship's unusual design. Elena felt a spark of interest. What do you mean? Your vessel appears to be built for extended deep space operations. The redundant systems, the heavy shielding, the multiple backup power sources. Most species build ships for specific purposes, but yours seems prepared for any situation. We believe in being prepared, Elena said. Our ship is designed to operate independently for years if necessary. Years? Zekhan seemed surprised. Most exploration vessels carry supplies for months at most. They rely on supply chains and support from their home territories. Elena realized she might have said too much. Earth's military doctrine was based on the assumption that space would be hostile and that human vessels would need to operate far from home for extended periods. We prefer self-sufficiency, she said, diplomatically. Zekhan studied her for a moment. You mentioned that your ship represents the United Nations of Sol. Are there other organizations? Other fleets? Elena felt the weight of the question. This was the moment where she would either build trust or create suspicion. She decided on partial honesty. The Meridian is part of our exploration program, she said. We have other vessels engaged in various missions. How many other vessels? Elena hesitated. Earth currently had over 40,000 ships of various classes, with more being built every month. The entire human economy had been restructured around the assumption that space exploration would require massive military and industrial resources. We have adequate resources to support our exploration efforts, she said carefully. Something in her tone seemed to alarm Zekhan. His posture became more rigid and his eyes narrowed slightly. Captain Vasquez, are you telling me that this exploration vessel is not your species' primary military asset? The question caught Elena off guard. She realized that Zekhan assumed the Meridian was representative of human space power, the way patrol ships were for the Zephyrians. The Meridian is not a military vessel, she said. It is designed for exploration and peaceful contact. But you have military vessels? Elena nodded slowly. We have ships designed for defense, yes. Zekhan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of concern. Captain, the galaxy has just emerged from a terrible war. The Zephyrian hegemony and the Vrak Collective fought for 3 centuries, destroying much of our military capacity. Most species are focused on rebuilding, not on expansion. We understand, Elena said. We have no intention of interfering with your recovery efforts. But you are expanding, Zekhan pointed out. Your species is sending ships into previously unexplored space. Ships built for extended independent operations. That suggests significant industrial capacity. Elena realized that the conversation had taken a dangerous turn. She was supposed to be conducting peaceful first contact, but somehow she had given the impression that humanity was a major galactic power. Commander, we simply wish to explore and learn. We hope to establish friendly relations with other species. Zekhan nodded, but Elena could see that he was thinking hard about everything she had told him. The Zephyrian was clearly trying to assess the threat level that humanity might represent. Captain Vasquez, would it be possible for me to see more of your ship? As a gesture of friendship? Elena knew this was really a request for intelligence gathering, but refusing would seem hostile. Of course, Commander. You are welcome aboard the Meridian. As the 2 ships moved closer together to facilitate the transfer, Elena wondered what Zekhan would think when he saw the human vessel up close. Even exploration ships like the Meridian were built to military standards, with armor plating and weapon systems that could handle serious threats. She hoped the Zephyrian would interpret it as simple caution rather than preparation for war. Because the truth was something that would probably terrify every species in the galaxy. Humanity had spent 4 centuries building the largest military force in their solar system's history, all based on the assumption that aliens would be hostile. The Meridian was not humanity's sword. It was barely even a letter opener compared to what waited in Earth's shipyards. Admiral Kesistar read the intelligence report for the 4th time, but the words refused to make sense. The data had been compiled from dozens of sources: merchant traders, deep space sensors, captured communications, and direct observation by patrol ships. All of it pointed to the same impossible conclusion. "This cannot be accurate," he said to Intelligence Director Morgan, who stood across from his desk with the patience of someone delivering very bad news. "I have verified the information through 7 independent sources, Admiral. The humans have been building for 400 years without interruption." Kesitar set the report down and rubbed his tired eyes. 400 years. The entire duration of the war between his people and the Vrak Collective, these humans had been preparing for something. While the galaxy's 2 greatest powers destroyed each other, a species no one had ever heard of was quietly building what appeared to be the largest military force in galactic history. "Explain it to me again," Kesistar said. "Make me understand how this is possible." Morgan activated the holographic display in the center of the room. A 3-dimensional map appeared, showing the human solar system called Sol. Dozens of planets, moons, and asteroids glowed with different colors indicating various types of installations. "The humans call their homeworld Earth," Morgan began, "but they have not limited themselves to one planet. They have built industrial facilities on every solid surface in their system. Gas giant moons have been converted into shipyards. Asteroids have been hollowed out and turned into factories. Even their star itself has collection stations gathering energy." The display zoomed in on various installations. Massive orbital platforms surrounded Earth like a metal shell. Space elevators connected the surface to construction facilities that stretched for thousands of kilometers. On Mars, enormous foundries worked day and night producing materials for the fleet. "Their production capacity is beyond anything we have seen," Morgan continued. "Our best estimates suggest they can build more ships in 1 year than the entire Zephyrian hegemony constructed in the last century of the war." Kesitar stood and walked around the hologram, studying the details. "But why? What were they preparing for?" "That is perhaps the most concerning part, Admiral. According to the intelligence we have gathered from their exploration vessel, they assumed that space would be filled with hostile alien species. Their entire civilization has been organized around the belief that they would need to fight for survival against unknown enemies. They expected us to be hostile? Not us specifically. They had no knowledge of our existence. They simply assumed that any alien species would be a threat to their survival, so they prepared accordingly. The implications were staggering. While the Zephyrians and Vrak had fought each other to exhaustion, using the military resources they had built up over centuries, humanity had spent those same centuries building nothing but military resources. They had unified their entire species around the goal of being ready for interstellar warfare. "Show me their fleet composition," Kesitar ordered. The display changed, showing technical specifications of human vessels. Kester had expected to see primitive ships, the kind that newly spacefaring species typically built. Instead, he found himself looking at designs that were both alien and terrifying in their efficiency. "They call this a destroyer-class vessel," Morgan said, highlighting a ship that was larger than most Zephyrian cruisers. "It is considered a small escort ship in their fleet. They have constructed over 15,000 of them." Kesitar felt his blood growing cold. 15,000 ships that were larger and more heavily armed than the majority of his remaining fleet, and those were just the small ones. "Their heavy units are called dreadnoughts," Morgan continued. "Each one carries more firepower than our largest battleships. They have built over 2,000 of them." The numbers were overwhelming. The human fleet outnumbered the combined pre-war strength of both the Zephyrians and the Vrak Collective. But it was not just the quantity that concerned Kesitar. The design philosophy was completely different from anything the galaxy had seen. "Their ships are built for extended independent operations," Morgan explained. They carry enough supplies and spare parts to operate for years without resupply. They have redundant systems for every critical function. They are designed to fight against enemies whose capabilities are completely unknown. Kessitar studied the technical diagrams. Human ships were overbuilt by galactic standards, with multiple backup systems for everything. Where other species designed vessels for specific roles, human ships seemed prepared for any possible situation. What about their weapons? This is where the reports become truly concerning, Admiral. The humans have developed their military technology specifically for warfare against unknown alien threats. Their weapons are designed to counter every possible advantage they could imagine aliens might possess. The display showed various human weapon systems, energy weapons that could adapt their frequency to overcome different types of shielding, kinetic weapons that could adjust their ammunition type based on target composition, electronic warfare systems designed to disrupt any form of computer-controlled technology. They assumed alien technology would be superior to theirs, Morgan said. So they built weapons that would work even against more advanced enemies. Their entire military doctrine is based on fighting opponents who might have significant technological advantages. Kestar realized what this meant. The humans had prepared for war against enemies like the Zephyrians and Vrak at their peak. They had built their entire military around the assumption that they would be the underdogs in any conflict. How many total ships do they have? Kessitar asked, though he dreaded the answer. Conservative estimates suggest over 40,000 vessels of frigate size or larger. They also have support ships, logistics vessels, and mobile construction platforms that would allow them to maintain operations indefinitely. 40,000 ships. The number was so large it was difficult to comprehend. The Zephyrian hegemony had started the war with 50,000 ships, but that had been the accumulation of military construction over 2,000 years. The humans had built nearly as many in just 4 centuries. There is more, Admiral, Morgan said quietly. The exploration vessel we encountered, the one that made first contact with Commander Zekan, was not sent alone. Our deep space monitors have detected at least a dozen similar vessels spread across the galactic rim. They are conducting a systematic survey of all inhabited systems, mapping our defenses, Kestar said. Most likely, but Admiral, given their industrial capacity, I do not believe they need to map our defenses. They have the strength to overwhelm any resistance the current galactic powers could offer. Kessitar returned to his chair and stared at the holographic display. The human solar system blazed with industrial activity, a hive of construction and preparation that had been growing for centuries while the galaxy fought itself to exhaustion. What do the other species know about this? He asked. Very little. Most are focused on rebuilding after the war. The few intelligence services that are still functional have dismissed the humans as another minor species beginning to explore space. Because they want to believe the age of great wars is over. Kester said bitterly, Yes, Admiral. No one wants to accept that a new power has emerged, especially one with this level of capability. Kessitar stood again, looking out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were moving through the darkness, cataloging systems and resources. A species that had spent 400 years preparing for galactic warfare was finally ready to emerge into a galaxy that had just finished destroying itself. Prepare a detailed report. For the High Council, Kessitar ordered. Include everything we know about human capabilities and intentions. Mark it with the highest priority classification. Yes, Admiral. What should I recommend for our response? Kessitar was quiet for a long moment. The Zephyrian hegemony had 43 operational warships. The humans had 40,000. The math was not complicated. Recommend that we hope they are truly as peaceful as they claim to be, he said finally. Because if they decide we are a threat to their expansion, there is nothing anyone in this galaxy can do to stop them. As Morgan left to prepare the report, Kestar remained at the viewport staring into the darkness between stars. The galaxy had believed the war was over, that peace would finally come. Instead, they had simply been given time to count the cost while something far more powerful prepared to reshape everything they thought they knew about the balance of power among the stars. The colony ship New Horizon had been traveling for 18 months when the Vrak intercepted her. Captain Sarah Martinez received the first distress signal at 0347 ship time, but by then it was already too late to help the 15,000 civilian families aboard the massive vessel. The attack came without warning. 3 Vrak heavy cruisers, survivors from the war that had ended 5 years ago, dropped out of hyperspace and immediately opened fire on the defenseless colony ship. The New Horizon was not a warship. She carried farming equipment, construction materials, and the hopes of people seeking a new life among the stars. The last transmission from Captain Hendricks was brief and full of static. "This is the New Horizon under attack by unknown hostiles. We have civilians aboard. We are not a military target. Please send help." The transmission reached Admiral Chen aboard the dreadnought Indomitable 6 hours later. By then, the New Horizon was debris scattered across 3 million cubic kilometers of space. 15,000 men, women, and children were dead, killed for the crime of being human. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the briefing room of her flagship, studying the tactical display that showed the wreck positions. Around her, the commanders of the Third Fleet waited for orders. These were not the politicians and diplomats who had been handling first contact with the galactic species. These were soldiers, and they had just watched their people die. The Vrak force consists of approximately 200 vessels concentrated in the Kepler 442 system, reported Intelligence Colonel Williams. They appear to be the remnants of the 47th Vrak battle hive, survivors from the war with the Zephyrians. "Defensive capabilities?" Chen asked. "Comparable to late-war Zephyrian technology, heavy armor, particle beam weapons, and swarm fighter tactics. They have fortified the system with orbital weapons platforms and minefields." Chen nodded. The Vrak had turned Kepler 442 into a fortress, believing that their defensive preparations would protect them from retaliation. They did not understand what they were facing. "Time to target? 18 days at maximum fleet speed, Admiral. Make it 12 days. I want us there before they can strengthen their positions further." The Third Fleet began moving toward Vrak space within 6 hours of receiving the distress call. 47 ships total, led by 6 dreadnoughts that each carried more firepower than an entire pre-war Zephyrian battle group. The fleet also included support vessels, electronic warfare ships, and the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. As the fleet traveled through hyperspace, news of the attack spread throughout human space. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Earth government declared the Vrak Collective to be a hostile enemy of humanity. Production facilities that had been running at peacetime levels suddenly shifted to wartime output. 3 additional fleets began mobilizing for deployment. But Admiral Chen did not wait for reinforcements. The Third Fleet was more than sufficient for what needed to be done. The Vrak had been preparing for the human response. Queen Zakath, the hive leader who had ordered the attack on the colony ship, believed that the humans would send a small punitive force. Perhaps 20 or 30 ships, similar to the exploration vessels that had been making contact around the galaxy. She was confident in her defenses. The Kepler 442 system had been fortified over decades of war with the Zephyrians. Massive weapons platforms orbited the primary world. Millions of automated mines filled the approach routes. The Vrak fleet was positioned to take advantage of every defensive structure. When the human fleet arrived, Queen Zakath realized she had made a terrible mistake. The first indication was the sensor readings. 47 contacts, but each one was larger and more heavily armed than anything in her database. The human dreadnoughts alone massed more than her entire fleet combined. The second indication was their tactics. Instead of approaching cautiously through the minefields, the human ship spread out into a formation that covered millions of kilometers. Long-range sensors detected massive energy buildups from the human vessels. The third indication was the opening bombardment. The humans did not attempt to negotiate. They did not demand surrender. They simply began destroying everything in the system that was not marked as a civilian target. The orbital weapons platforms, each one the size of a city, and armed with weapons that had held off Zephyrian fleets for decades, were eliminated in the first 60 seconds of combat. Human railgun rounds, fired from extreme range, punched through armor that had been designed to stop the heaviest weapons the galaxy had known. The minefield that had protected the system approaches was cleared by hunter-killer drones that moved faster and struck harder than Vrak point defense systems could track. Within 10 minutes, safe corridors had been opened through defensive barriers that had taken years to construct. Queen Zakath ordered her fleet to attack. 200 Vrak ships moved to engage the human force, confident in their numerical advantage. The Queen had won battles against larger Zephyrian forces through superior tactics and the willingness to accept heavy casualties. The human response shattered every assumption she had. made about space warfare. The human ships moved in perfect coordination, as if they were controlled by a single mind. Their formation shifted fluidly, bringing maximum firepower to bear on the Vrak advance while minimizing their own exposure to return fire. Electronic warfare systems disrupted Vrak communications and targeting systems with devastating effectiveness. But it was the human weapons that truly terrified the surviving Vrak commanders. Energy beams that adapted their frequency to overcome Vrak shielding. Missiles that adjusted their attack profiles based on real-time analysis of their targets. Point defense systems that intercepted incoming fire with impossible accuracy. The battle lasted 14 minutes. When it was over, the Vrak 47th Battle Hive had ceased to exist. 200 warships had been reduced to expanding clouds of plasma and debris. The orbital defenses that had protected the system for decades were silent hulks drifting in space. But Admiral Chen was not finished. The Third Fleet had not traveled 12 days simply to win a single battle. They had come to ensure that the Vrak Collective would never again threaten human civilians. Over the following weeks, human forces systematically dismantled every Vrak military installation they could find. Shipyards that had produced vessels for 3 centuries of warfare were reduced to molten metal. Supply depots containing weapons and equipment for millions of soldiers were destroyed. The few surviving Vrak commanders who tried to negotiate surrender found that the humans had no interest in discussions. This was not a war in the traditional sense. This was extermination of a threat to human expansion. The galaxy watched in growing horror as reports filtered in from Vrak space. The Zephyrians, who had fought the Vrak for 300 years without achieving decisive victory, saw their ancient enemies destroyed in 3 months. Species that had hidden from the Great War emerging to witness the systematic dismantling of a galactic power. The humans did not occupy Vrak worlds. They did not enslave surviving populations. They simply removed every trace of Vrak military capability, and then withdrew, leaving behind a civilization that could no longer threaten anyone. Queen Zakth died in the defense of her home hive, but her final transmission was detected by monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. They fight like the survival of their species depends on victory. They do not simply defeat enemies, they eliminate threats entirely. The demonstration was complete. The galaxy had seen what happened when someone attacked human civilians. The Vrak Collective, survivors of a 3-century war that had devastated 2 major powers, had been erased from existence by a single human fleet in less than 3 months. Admiral Chen filed her report from the Bridge of the Indomitable as her fleet prepared to return to human space. The Third Fleet had completed its mission with minimal casualties. The threat to human expansion had been eliminated. Behind them, the remnants of the Vrak Collective struggled to comprehend what had happened to their civilization. Ahead of them, the galaxy began to understand that humanity was not just another species exploring space. They were a military power unlike anything that had ever existed among the stars. And they had 46 more fleets just like the Third. The meeting took place aboard the human dreadnought Sovereign, a vessel so large that it had its own internal transportation system. Admiral Kessitar traveled through corridors that could have housed his entire remaining fleet, past armor plating thick enough to stop weapons that could crack planets. He was not alone. Representatives from every major galactic power had been invited to this gathering. The Morvac Republic, the Kalari Trade Federation, the Assembly Machine Collective, and dozens of smaller species. All of them had come to meet with Admiral Sarah Chen, commander of the Human Expeditionary Force. The briefing room where they assembled could have held 1,000 beings. Chen had arranged for translation equipment and environmental controls to accommodate every known form of sapient life. The attention to detail suggested that humanity had been planning for this moment for a long time. Admiral Chen entered exactly on schedule, followed by a small staff of human officers. She was shorter than Kessitar had expected, with gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in command. Her uniform was simple and practical, without the decorative elements that most galactic powers favored for formal occasions. "Thank you all for coming," she said, as she took her position at the head of the massive conference table. "I know many of you have traveled far to be here." Kessitar studied the human commander carefully. After witnessing the destruction of the Vrak Collective, every species in the galaxy wanted to understand the beings who had accomplished it. Chen appeared calm and professional, but there was something in her eyes that suggested enormous depth of experience. Before we begin formal discussions, Chen continued, I want to address the primary concern that I know all of you share. You are wondering what humanity's intentions are regarding the galaxy at large. She activated a holographic display that showed the current political map of known space. Areas that had been controlled by the Vrak Collective were now marked as neutral territory. Zephyrian space was highlighted in blue, while human space appeared as a small green area near the galactic rim. Humanity has no interest in conquest, Chen said simply. We are not here to build an empire or to rule over other species. Ambassador Thelmos from the Morvac Republic leaned forward. Then why have you built such an enormous military force? Our intelligence suggests you have more ships than all other galactic powers combined. Chen nodded. That assessment is correct. We currently operate 47 active fleets with additional forces in reserve. Our industrial capacity allows us to maintain and expand these forces indefinitely. The numbers sent a chill through the assembled representatives. 47 fleets, each one comparable to the force that had destroyed the Vrak Collective in 3 months. But you must understand our perspective, Chen continued. When humanity first began exploring space, we had no knowledge of galactic civilization. We assumed that space would be filled with hostile species competing for resources and territory. We prepared accordingly. Trade Director Velhan of the Kalari Federation spoke up. But now you know that most species are peaceful. Surely you can reduce your military preparations. Chen's expression became slightly harder. Director Velhan, we have been monitoring galactic communications for the past several years. We have observed a 3-century war between major powers that devastated entire star systems. We have seen species driven to near extinction by military conflict. From our perspective, the galaxy is an extremely dangerous place. Kessitar realized what Chen was saying. Humanity had not built their military for conquest. They had built it for defense against what they saw as a galaxy filled with warlike species. Admiral Chen, he said carefully, humanity has demonstrated the ability to destroy any military force in the galaxy. What assurance can you give us that you will not use that power for expansion? Chen smiled slightly, but the expression was not entirely reassuring. Admiral Kessitar, I think you misunderstand our position. Humanity is not concerned with expansion at the expense of existing civilizations. We have more systems than we can currently colonize within our own space. She gestured to the holographic display. What concerns us is the possibility of future conflicts that could threaten human interests. The war between your people and the Vrak lasted 3 centuries. It produced refugees, disrupted trade, and created the conditions that led to the attack on our colony ship. The implications were staggering. Chen was suggesting that humanity would act to prevent large-scale galactic conflicts, not for humanitarian reasons, but to protect their own interests. Are you saying that humanity will intervene in future wars? Asked Assembly Unit 7792, speaking through a mechanical translator. We are saying that humanity will not allow conflicts to develop that could threaten our expansion or the safety of our civilians, Chen replied. The galaxy has demonstrated that left to its own devices, it will periodically erupt into devastating wars that last for centuries. Chen activated another display, showing human construction projects throughout their space. Massive installations were being built on the borders between human space and the rest of the galaxy. These are monitoring stations and rapid response bases, she explained. They will allow us to observe galactic affairs and respond quickly to developing threats. We are also establishing trade and diplomatic relationships with species that demonstrate commitment to peaceful resolution of conflicts. The message was clear. Humanity was building the infrastructure to police the galaxy, whether the galaxy wanted it or not. Ambassador Thelmos tried a different approach. Admiral, many species have concerns about submitting to human authority. We have our own governments and traditions. We have no intention of interfering with internal affairs of other species, Chen said. You may govern yourselves however you choose, trade with whomever you wish, and follow whatever cultural practices you prefer. Our only requirement is that you not engage in military conflicts that could escalate to threaten galactic stability. And if we refuse? Kester asked quietly. Chen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was calm and professional, but the threat was unmistakable. Admiral, the Vrak Collective refused to limit their military activities. They chose to attack human civilians rather than accept peaceful coexistence. The galaxy has seen the result of that decision. The room fell silent. Every representative present understood what Chen was saying. Cooperation with humanity was not optional. It was a requirement for survival. However, Chen continued, we believe that most species will find the new arrangement beneficial. Trade will be safer and more profitable when protected by human patrols. Scientific research will advance more rapidly when knowledge is shared freely. Colonial expansion will proceed more smoothly when conflicts are prevented, rather than resolved through warfare. Director Velhan spoke carefully. What you are describing is a galactic government with humanity as the dominant power. What we are describing is a galactic peace enforced by the species with the capability to maintain it, Chen corrected. For the first time in galactic history, one power has the strength to prevent large-scale military conflicts before they begin. Chen stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars beyond. Gentlemen, ladies, and artificial intelligences, the age of great wars is indeed over. Not because civilizations have learned to coexist peacefully, but because one civilization has become powerful enough to prevent the others from fighting. She turned back to face the assembled representatives. You have a choice. You can accept human leadership and the peace it will bring, or you can attempt to maintain the old system of competing military powers and periodic devastating wars. But understand that the second option will not be permitted to threaten human interests. Kessitar looked around the room at the other representatives. Fear was visible in every face, whether biological, artificial, or somewhere in between. They were witnessing the birth of a new galactic order, one where a single species would determine the fate of thousands of others. What about species that are still developing? Those that have not yet achieved interstellar travel? Asked Assembly Unit 7792. They will be contacted when they are ready and offered the same choice, Chen replied. Join the galactic community under human protection, or remain isolated in their home systems. The meeting continued for several more hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. One by one, the representatives agreed to accept the new reality. Trade agreements were signed. Monitoring protocols were established. Mutual defense pacts were negotiated. As Kestar prepared to return to his ship, he reflected on what had just occurred. The galaxy had indeed entered a new age of peace. Wars between major powers would be a thing of the past. Trade would flourish under human protection. Scientific advancement would accelerate through shared knowledge, but it would be a peace imposed by overwhelming force, maintained by a species that had spent 4 centuries preparing for galactic warfare. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through conquest. They had simply become too powerful for anyone else to challenge. As his transport departed the Sovereign, Kessitar looked back at the massive human dreadnought. Somewhere aboard that vessel, Admiral Chen was probably already planning the construction of additional fleets.